everyone, it's Monica, and welcome back to Tailor Made Cards for You. Well, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a technique collaboration with another YouTuber, and her name is Janie. You may also know her as the Craft Princess. Now, Janie and I met online through Facebook, and it seems like a lot of us are getting to know several people on Facebook because we have a common interest and a love for stamping. So she and I decided to do a collaboration on how to create backgrounds so you don't have to use designer paper. Now, if you're like me, you probably have lots of designer paper, and I really made a commitment to myself not to purchase anymore. So this is a way that you can create backgrounds with just your stamps. Now, there are a lot of stamps out there that will help you with this technique. Tim Holtz, his sets come with several stamps that coordinate really well together. I've often created a lot of my backgrounds and my layering techniques using his stamps. Stencils are another way that you can create backgrounds, but I'm not going to be necessarily using a stencil on this particular video. Now, the two cards that I'm showing you here, one of them on the left is more of a layered card, and this is where I took an oversized stamp to create my background, and then I stamped some images onto the cardstock. Now, the one on the right is more of a distinct pattern, and this is where I took a stamp, and this stamp actually had all the flowers together, but you could easily create this technique by just using a couple of floral stamps. And as you can see, I left some white in the middle so that way my sentiment would stand out. Now, there's a couple of things that I do when I am creating my backgrounds. One of them is I like to start out with an oversized paper because I like my backgrounds to look organic. And what that means is I don't necessarily want all of the images to be in the center of the card. I want some of them to be cut off. I also like to use different colors because I think that adds interest. So the card that I'm going to create for you today has a little bit of both of these techniques. I'm going to be using a particular stamp to create a background, and then I'm also going to use some specific stamps to create some layering. Now, since Father's Day isn't too far in the future, I thought I would go ahead and create a masculine card because I know a lot of you crafters out there do struggle with masculine cards. So I'm using my Tim Holtz stamp platform because I want to make sure that my images are nice and crisp. I love working with silhouette stamps, and these are the stamps that have a lot of ink, so the stamp platforms or the MISTI work really well for these. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the two images that I want to be my focal point, and I'm using my platform, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp these on. Now, one thing that I've discovered, and I don't know if it's just something that I like to do, but I like to stamp with a couple of different stamps when I'm stamping my silhouette stamps. And just for some reason, I have found this works really well for me. Now, typically, I'll start out with my hybrid ink stamp, which is from scrapbook.com. And I'll start out stamping that. And that gives a good, nice foundation. But what I have found is I can't necessarily get a deep black print with this particular ink. I don't know if it's because it's a hybrid or just because I can't seem to press down hard enough. So I like to go ahead and mix my inks. So I'll start out with the scrapbook.com black ink, which is again a hybrid ink, and then I'll switch over to an archival ink. Now, archival inks give me a nice dark, rich background. But when I start out with an archival ink, sometimes I can't get a really crisp impression, and I think that's why I go back and forth. One thing that I've also found is when I am stamping with acrylic stamps, it's not necessarily here because I'm using the deep rubber stamps, but when I'm stamping with acrylic stamps, when you first get your acrylic stamp, it tends to be a little bit sticky. So if you start out with a hybrid ink, that kind of gives it some sort of a coating or a texture, so that way it won't stick, and then you can move on to your archival inks. And as you can see, by switching back and forth with these inks, I'm able to get a nice crisp impression. Okay, so once I have my focal points in place, I want to go ahead and add to my background. Now, I wanted it to look like it was, again, cardstock. So I wanted to get a stamp where I can have a repeating action, kind of like what I did with those florals up on my top right side. But of course, I wanted it to be in theme. So I'm working with a stamp that has a little Route 66 sign, and this is from one of the Tim Holtz collections. And I'm going to be creating a patterned background. Now, one thing that I like to do when I am trying to create a pattern background is I like to create some sort of a design, some sort of a line that I can follow. Again, I want it to look somewhat organic, but I don't want it to necessarily just to be stamped all over the place. Now, you can definitely do this, but I just tend to like to have my backgrounds a little bit more organized. So I take a pencil and a ruler and I lightly put some marks that will help me to follow my pattern. Now, I am going to be using my stamp platform because I want to make sure that I do get some nice crisp images. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using a different color because I don't want it to necessarily get lost. I want it to kind of stand out. So I've decided to go ahead and use one of my distress inks. And the color that I ended up using was Weathered Wood. Now, another color that works really well for backgrounds is the Iced Spruce. And these are your gray tones. They go really nice with your black ink images. So if you're wanting to create some contrast, those two colors work really well together for that. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm just taking my stamp and I'm following my pencil line that I've created. And again, I'm trying to make it look a little bit organic. I don't necessarily want my images to be all perfectly on the card. I want it to look organic as if I had cut down some scrapbook paper. All right, so I went ahead and I sped up the video while I create my background. And I chose to use my stamp platform because I wanted my images to be nice and crisp. But on a technique like this, if you're confident with your stamping, you can easily use an acrylic block. And then what you would do is you would just use your lines as a guide. You don't necessarily have to stamp right on them, but this will at least enable you to have some sort of a pattern. Now, you could definitely follow the lines specifically so you would have diagonal images. And that would work better if you didn't actually have a couple of focal points. So for instance, as in that floral design that I used as an example earlier, if you were creating your background and then you were going to go ahead and add some images on the top of your background, you could definitely follow more of a pattern. But because I had already stamped 2 images on my white cardstock to use as my focal points, I couldn't necessarily follow those lines exactly, but they were great for giving me a guide. And then once I was happy with the overall background, I still wanted to add a little bit more. Now, you could definitely stop here, but I always like to fill in some of my white space, especially if I'm not going to necessarily add anything more to this. So I took another stamp that was from that Tim Holtz travel set. And these are tire tracks, so I thought that they were perfect just to fill in some of that white space. Now, one thing you do want to keep in mind, if you do have some focal points like I have with this Route 66 sign and this little guy by the gas pump, you want to make sure that those are more towards the center because like I said earlier, you want your background to look organic. So I started out with some white cardstock, which was a little bit bigger than my card. So I knew I was going to be trimming it down. And that's why I was strategic when I went ahead and I stamped my first couple of images. And now I'm going to go ahead and trim down my cardstock. Now I'm going to be matting this on a piece of black cardstock, which is going to measure 4 inches by 5 1/4. So I'll be trimming this cardstock down just by 1/4 inch. Now, as you can see, I don't necessarily just go right in and trim my 1/4 inch off. I am, again, strategic about it, and I want to make sure that I have this lined up perfectly so that way my 2 focal images are more towards the center. If I had gone in and just trimmed on one side, then it may have been a little bit lopsided, but I did want to make sure that my image did stay in the middle. All right, so once I had it completely trimmed, then I went ahead and I matted it onto some black cardstock. Now, I still think that my background needed a little bit more color, so I did decide to come in with some red Copic markers and paint my gas pump. And this gave it just enough color to add a little bit more interest. So like I said, this is a technique collaboration, and after you finish watching my video, I'm going to encourage you to hop on over to Janie's YouTube channel, and I will leave the link below for you. I met Janie through Facebook, which is where I meet a lot of my crafting friends. And she had asked if I would be interested in being a sponsor on one of her challenge blogs called Crafter's Castle. And I certainly love sponsoring and sharing some of my digital images that I have in my shop, so I was happy to do that. And then after that, she and I just started talking through instant messaging on Facebook, and we've become Facebook friends. And she's also the organizer for the Craftroom Helper video hops that you've seen me participate in. So hopefully, if you don't know Janie, this is going to be a good opportunity for you to get to know her and give you an opportunity to check out her channel and hopefully subscribe. Okay, so with this background, you can see where I not only created a pattern, but I also have my focal points. So this is a combination of having a pattern as well as some layering. Now, I wouldn't call this necessarily true layering because when I layer, I overlap a lot. And on this particular background, I didn't really overlap. I just created some stamped images on my white space. All right, so to finish up my card, I did want to go ahead and put a old car right in front of that gas pump because I really think that's going to finish off the card. So I am using, again, one of those images from that Tim Holtz collection because it's a perfect size card. All right, and then after I was finished stamping it, I went ahead and I fussy cut the card, and I'm going to add some foam tape to adhere it to my panel. So I hope that you've enjoyed my process for putting together this card and that I've given you some ideas on creating backgrounds. Now don't forget, this is a collaboration, so after you finish watching my video, I'm going to go ahead and have a link below my channel so you can hop on over to Janie's channel, and she's going to be showing you some more techniques on creating backgrounds. I'll also have a list of all the products that I've used to create the card along with the links to the stores. And if you've enjoyed my video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're going to be having a Save the YouTubers video hop in a couple of days, and there's going to be a lot of inspiration, so you definitely don't want to miss that. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.